Okay, so we're going to start the second lecture of Paytech. Thanks for all of you who came today. My name is Ofira Eliav. I'm the managing director of the Gershon Fintech Center. The Gershon Fintech Center was founded by Professor David Gershon. And the main purpose of this center is to assist and advance the fintech industry in Israel. The center promotes entrepreneurship, advanced technologies, strategic thinking, marketing, and go-to-market methodologies. It also makes the connection between startups companies and companies that seek their technology, and between financial institutions and academia researchers to promote real-world problems in academic research. The center is responsible for some of the MBA courses in fintech, such as entrepreneurship in fintech and Finnovation. We also manage many workshops for startups and for entrepreneurs and for students who aim to create fintech startups in the fintech area. So I would like to introduce today, for the second time, Oded Salomy. Oded is the director of payment systems and a member of the top management team at the Bank of Israel. Oded previously led Visa in Israel and other markets, founded Visa's Tel Aviv Innovation Studio, and held a number of payment-related executive roles in the high-tech industry. Oded is a corporate attorney by training and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania and a BA with honors from Harvard University. Thank you, Oded, for being with us and for leading this so interesting course for the public, for the students, and for everyone to hear and learn. So the stage is yours now.
Okay, thank you, Ofira. Thank you all for joining. Just a few housekeeping notes. Again, we have 4 lectures in total. This is the second of 4. The first one from 2 weeks ago was recorded and is available for viewing at the Fintech Center's website, as well as the Bank of Israel's YouTube channel. All 4 will be available once we're done, in case you'd like to refer someone else or see a lecture that you missed. As I mentioned before, I'm happy to teach this short mini course for the Hebrew University. I'm doing it in that capacity, not in the capacity as the Bank of Israel. However, I am doing my best to stay true to our policies in the views that I express. But again, this is on behalf of the university. I want to begin today something different from last time, which is I want to show you 3 short videos. And we practiced this technically, and I really hope it works because they're pretty cool. I should also say, today, the topic of today's lecture is payment cards. So that's prepaid cards, debit cards, and credit cards, as well as A2A, so account-to-account payments. I spent most of my time in the payments industry in the cards space, and so I have a lot to say, and I actually spent a lot of time catching up to make sure what I'm saying continues to be relevant. So we may not get through all the material this lecture, but that's okay, because we have another lecture. And so if I don't get to the A2A section or complete it, we'll just finish up in lecture number 3, which will be mostly about digital currencies, but we will have that time. And also in terms of housekeeping, we made a decision that I am going to go to Money 2020 2 weeks from now, so we won't be able to have the session as previously scheduled. So the next session will be 3 weeks from now, not 2 weeks from now. And I think Ofira sent an update to all of you about the change of dates. So now I'm going to try to do this funky share screen with sound. and show you a few videos. Let's just hope it works. 1 second. Fear, please send me a WhatsApp if there's a problem, but I'm about to show you the first video.
This is a wallet, and this is Google Wallet. They both keep hold of your credit cards. Loyalty cards, gift cards, boarding passes, transit passes, vaccine cards, concert tickets, ID cards. Car keys? Well, yeah, I guess you could put those in a regular wallet. Might hurt to sit down, but... Oh, look at that. Google Wallet lets you virtually access your car keys. Is a regular wallet secure? Kinda. Not really. Maybe a chain wallet? Google Wallet, though, super secure. It gives you all the security features of your Android phone. Plus, it lets you control your data and encrypts all your purchases. Speaking of purchases, once you add your card, you can tap to pay everywhere Google Pay is accepted. You can also choose to connect Google Wallet to other Google apps, making them even more helpful. So it'll know when to send you event notifications, flight updates, and let you see your transit card balances. Okay, so maybe Google Wallet is different. In a good way. In many good ways.
Okay, hopefully you liked that one. I will tell you that this video was posted, as you can see here, on May 11th.
Ladies.
So this is not long ago. It's a bit surprising because Apple launched its wallet several years ago. And yet, some of the things they're showing are so cool and are not available still in most markets, certainly not in Israel for those of us who are in Israel. And I think that's most of us. And we'll talk a little bit more about wallets during the presentation, but I wanted to kind of show you stuff that's happening here and now. I want to show you another video and I'm having trouble making that happen. Hold on. Let's see if I can. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop share. And now I'm going to share again. So let me give a quick intro to this one. Many of you are aware that Amazon is opening supermarkets across the United States. And many of you have heard of Amazon Go, which enables you to pick something up and buy it from the store and walk out without actually having to go through the cashier. I did some searches to see what kind of recent things can I tell you guys about. So one of the headlines is no longer just Amazon Go, it's Amazon Fresh, which is a name for their grocery store with a technology called Just Walk Out. That's the name of the product, Just Walk Out. And the headline that I wanted to show you, which I will show you, is that they're opening in New Jersey and New York, I think this month, something like that. But I want to show you a video about Just Walk Out, and let's hope that I can make that happen. 1 second. 1 second, please. Technology is great when it works, or when you know how to operate it. Hold on. So I'll try again. Okay, do you see a screen that says Just Walk Out?
Yes, we can see it.
You do?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, we can see it.
You hear it? Can you hear it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, here we go.
The analogy I like to use for Just Walk Out technology is that it works like self-driving cars. So we use a combination of computer vision, sensor fusion, and deep learning to provide a checkout-free shopping experience, and it's also highly accurate. What a shopper does when they approach the gate is they enter or tap their credit card on the gate. The gate opens and you walk into the store and shop like you normally would. When a shopper's in the store and they take items from the shelf, we're putting it into a virtual cart. The same happens when a shopper returns something to the shelf. We take it out of the virtual cart. Once that's done and they walk out, that virtual cart is what's charged to that shopper.
I feel Amazon Just Walk Out technology empowers the guests and puts them in control of the shopping experience. Resorts World's always looking for the most technologically advanced systems, so really the choice was easy to work with Just Walk Out technology by Amazon, and the technology's unbeatable.
You just walk in, get your stuff, you don't have to wait in line, it's less hassle. It was very easy and convenient not having to go up to a cash register and wait in line and just kind of go in and out really quickly.
We support third-party stores through our Just Walk Out technology business. So we help our customers understand the technology, implement that technology, and support it for the life of the technology. So we bring the people, the processes, and the training necessary to our customers in order to make them fully successful with our solution and to enable checkout-free shopping in their stores. This is why we're doing this. It's because we want to make the shopping experience effortless.
Okay, so I just want to explain what we saw there were lots of cameras and sensors. Maybe we didn't see all of them all over the store that can tell when my body goes into the store. They can tell what my body does in the store. They know which products I took. Oh, no, hold on. I don't know what's going on now. 1 second. I see there's another video going. 1 second.
So if you're not familiar with Resorts World, let me give you kind of a heads up. It's basically 3 hotels in one place. You've got the Hilton, you've got the Conrad, and you've got the Crockfords.
Okay.
And the idea is that the...
There we go. Apologies. Okay, so what we also saw there is that the store where the technology was deployed is not an Amazon store. So Amazon bought Wholesale Foods, which is a chain of supermarkets. They're rolling out this new brand called Amazon Fresh, but they're also selling this technology to other retailers to enable them to let shoppers walk in, take product and walk out. And then their card will be saved in the cloud somewhere, and that's how they pay because it's identified through AI. And one last very short video that I want to show you, which was posted on Twitter by Apple, like, I don't know, last week or something like that. And this is a video that was taken in the Apple Visitor Center in Cupertino County in California. I think it was California. And the issue is the new offering that they're hoping to bring to market is that if you have an iPhone, it will also be a payment card terminal. You'll be able to accept payments. We can already use our phone to make payments with Apple Pay. But if you want to accept a payment from someone else using NFC technology, so tap to pay, rather than tapping to pay on a credit card terminal like we do in the stores, you'll be able to tap to pay on someone else's phone, which will become a card terminal, which is quite cool. And they posted a very short video on that on Twitter. 1 second. Should show you that. Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Everybody ready?
That's so sick.
Okay, that is actually pretty cool. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Everybody ready?
That's so sick.
Okay, that is actually pretty cool.
Okay, so what we saw there were basically 2 iPhones, one paying the other as if it were a card terminal. So these are all things, again, very recent. And that's kind of the fun part of what we're going to do today. Now let's go into a little bit of substance. 1 second. I'm going to try now to share my presentation. 1 second. Okay, so the first video we saw was about Google launching its wallet with all the things it allows us to do using ticket. You can store tickets there, and driver's license and vaccine records and a digital car key and identity cards, government issued identity cards. And what you see on the right here is an image of that wallet. And as I mentioned earlier, Apple did that with Apple Wallet quite some time ago. Many of us know Apple Pay, but Apple Pay is only one part of the Apple Wallet. So the idea is, think of a leather wallet and everything that you have in it. You can also get all those features digitally and more. But at the same time, I think it was the same day, Google also announced that they are going to they're going to enable issuance of a virtual card. You see this screen on the left here? Every time you want to make a payment, instead of using your ordinary credit card, you can get a virtual card, which basically will be an alias. And so it should feel safer and make e-commerce more secure, because rather than putting in your full credit card number into whatever website or app that you're using to make a purchase, you actually put in a virtual card. This is something that was implemented by some of the Israeli credit card companies as well as others around the world, but now Google is making it available. Amazon Fresh, I promised you on May 18th in a publication, Supermarket News, they announced that they're going to roll out Amazon Fresh in New York and New Jersey, where you tap your card at the entrance, collect items, and then just walk out, and your card is stored on file. You don't need to actually go through a cashier. So when they roll out Amazon Fresh in New York and New Jersey, which is not the first place they're rolling it out, it's in multiple locations across the United States, that technology will already be part of the store. And then one more thing about Apple, we just saw this video here where they're testing payment onto an iPhone as a terminal by tap, and that's being tested right now by Stripe and Adyen, which are progressive or modern and digitized card merchant acquirers, which we'll talk about. But they also announced something else, which is the second bullet that you see here, Apple to add support for NFC peer-to-peer payments. So it's not just to enable a consumer to pay a business, but it's also to make a person-to-person or peer-to-peer payment, like we use Bit in Israel to do. Now, in most places around the world, person-to-person or peer-to-peer payments are made using an app where the hardware is not, you don't need physical proximity between the devices. Here you can use the tap feature to move money between people. So that was all just a way of kind of like getting you guys excited about cards. Again, a quick commercial break. Next year, I'll be teaching 4 credit courses in the ABA program at Hebrew U. So if you are getting an MBA at Hebrew U, we'd love to see you there. We are now live and on our website, the Bank of Israel website, advertising our conference on payments on June 20th. Really is going to be very interesting. We have a lot of good speakers, including a number who are coming from abroad. So please sign up. And we have lots of content on the Bank of Israel YouTube channel if you want to learn more. So this course is called the Paytech Frontier. It's lecture number 2. We finished lecture number 1 2 weeks ago, which was about the business case for payments, and went through a number of trends. Some of you noted that it was a bit difficult because some of the information was new, and here I was already talking about the trends. Well, now we're going to go through the basics. Today's lecture is about payment cards and account-to-account payments. The next lecture, 3 weeks from now, will be about digital currencies. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to do cross-border payments, B2B payments, and a little bit about regulation. So when we talk about payment cards and A2A, I'm going to break it up into 4 parts. The first is global brands and market structure. Then I'll talk about merchant acquiring. Then I'll talk about card issuing. And then if we have time, we'll talk about account-to-account or A2A payments. And if we don't, we'll do that next time. Just 50,000 feet. Important to understand that if we think about payments, there's really, there are many ways to dissect the payments world. So one way to bifurcate it is to talk about retail payments and wholesale payments. So retail payments are those payments that actually involve consumers, people, and businesses. So either a person paying a business or a business paying a person or a person paying a person. And that is generally done using payment cards, account to account, or cash. And that's really what we're talking about today. Those tend to be smaller transactions. So not high value, but very large numbers of transactions. So in retail payments, you typically won't see $1 million transaction, but you will see millions of $20 transactions, for example. So low average transaction value, but high volumes. Wholesale payments are, and by the way, if you see at the bottom of the screen, you see a person on one end, you see 2 financial institutions in the middle, and then you see a store on the end. So eventually the money goes between the person and the store, but there are financial institutions in the middle. Wholesale payments is when the money moves between the financial institutions and does not originate or end up being paid to a consumer or a business. Those payments are generally made through the RTGS systems, real-time gross settlements payment systems, which are operated by the central bank. The one in Israel is called Zahav, and we operate that system in our department, hundreds of billions of shekels per day. SWIFT also does wholesale payments, and there are talks about deploying distributed ledger technology-based payment systems to enable other types of wholesale payments. And there are some pilot projects underway with that. That typically tends to be a small number of transactions, but very high volume. So, it could be the kinds of money that goes between a central bank and a commercial bank, or from one commercial bank to another commercial bank. Lots of zeros on the end. Every transaction, or in most cases, the transactions are very high value, but there aren't that many of them. So let's talk about retail payments. And retail payments, when we talk about payment cards, I want to also make a semantic note. The word cards is misleading because historically they were plastic cards. They were cards, and they still are cards that we can hold, touch, and feel. But as we know, we're moving into a digital world. We already did move into a digital world where more than half the payments are no longer made with a physical card, more than half of the card payments. So not even true to say typically, because it's not typical anymore. But historically, when the payments were made with plastic cards, not digitally, they had 16 digits on them and other information that identified you as an individual. And for that reason, we often now use a different word, which is credentials. So we save the cardholder's credentials on file rather than requiring the cardholder to hold a physical card. So there are a number of global brands that enable us to make and receive payments using payment cards. The best known one is Visa, based in the US, at least in the West, it's the best known one. MasterCard is also extremely well known, almost identical to Visa in terms of brand recognition. They compete. Some of them, they each like to prove how their brand equity is better. or worth more, but they are mega corporations with huge profit volumes. I didn't check recently, but it's between 40 and 50% profit because they have such good business models, and we'll talk about them in a minute. American Express is also based in the US. China UnionPay is a very interesting phenomena because in the West, we are hardly aware of them, or we're not aware of them at all. And yet, a few years ago already, so for many years, the number of cards issued with the China UnionPay logo was larger than the number of cards issued by Visa, which is a surprise. But the industry used to say, well, you know what? They have a lot of cards because they have a lot of people, but the value of their transactions isn't that big. Guess what? A couple of years ago, the value of the transactions on UnionPay cards exceeded those of Visa. I did not check in the last year or two, but we're talking about a very large brand which has expanded way beyond the borders of China, both to service Chinese consumers who travel abroad, but also in pursuit of business in other markets. JCB is a brand based in Japan. And then Discover actually bought Diners Club a number of years ago, are smaller brands, and they are both based in the USA. So what are the brand promises that these large companies give? What is it that they're really, telling us? So they're saying, it's very easy to use my brand. It's very quick. And that, I think, is true of every single brand that you see on the screen. If it's not easy and quick, then you can't rely on it, and you're not going to use it as a payment method or means of payment. They're also promising their consumers that the systems using their brand are interoperable. So if you have a Visa card, you can literally travel anywhere in the world to any business. And if that business accepts Visa, if they have the Visa logo, your card will work. And the other way around. They go to the business and say, if you accept Visa, or if you accept MasterCard, or if you accept Amex, doesn't matter, or UnionPay, any consumer who comes to you, any consumer or business that has a card that was issued to him or to it, that comes to this business with that card, no matter where that consumer came from, that individual will be able to make a payment at this business. So we take this for granted as consumers. Those of us who are from the cards industry know quite how difficult and complicated this is. It is quite costly. It requires significant collaboration and synchronization of rules and technology. And it also takes me to the third point. It'll only work if it's all secure. So these huge global footprints with various iterations in specific markets also have cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and those all have to be protected. The brands also promise that they will have wide acceptance. So, I'm not only, as a brand, not only will a card be issued to me as a consumer, but I'll be able to use it. I'll have places that accept it. That's why it's called acceptance. They accept that payment method. And when they speak to merchants, so when we talk about a business that accepts payment by cards, we call that business a merchant. If that merchant receives an authorization for that payment for a specific transaction, the brands also guarantee that that payment will be made. Do the brands themselves make the payment? Does Visa make the payment? Does Visa move its own money into the business? No. There's a full ecosystem, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the rules, the scheme around which everyone operates, and each of these brands has its own set of rules, guarantees the payment to the business after the transaction was authorized. And just in terms of jargon, for those of you who are not from the industry, there is this other word that people use called schemes. So when people say, what do the schemes think? What are the schemes doing about this? Generally, what people mean is Visa and MasterCard. It's just another way people call them. Maybe sometimes the word schemes can refer to the other brands here, but for you to be aware, it's just another way to call them. Be great if I could page down. Here we go. So the global brands provide what we call Rails, which is a technology infrastructure for payment transaction data to move from one financial player to another. They provide, as I said earlier, a set of rules which enable all the competitors who are working in the same space to work together. What happens if there's a disagreement, an instance of fraud, transaction message that was lost, and on and on. They also provide, each of the brands provides a brand and branding to build consumer trust and merchant trust through security and fraud management. So if you are a consumer and you think that using this card might mean you'll be compromised and you might actually lose money, or you'll have to spend a lot of time regaining your identity, you might not trust that brand anymore and you might not want to work with it. And if the merchant doesn't trust the brand, the business feels that, okay, I just sold a bunch of goods and they were paid for by a particular payment card, but I didn't get paid on time. As a business, as a merchant, I won't trust that brand anymore and I won't want to use it. So gaining that trust is quite a feat. It's a word we use and take lightly. Without trust, none of this will work. And it does require significant investment, as well as, in many cases, oversight by supervisors and regulators such as myself and my team. In some cases, in some markets, the brands also establish the fees or the fee mechanisms that competitors use to pay each other. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And one other thing, which I think is absolutely critical and important to pay attention to, is thought leadership and innovation. I think if the brands didn't invest in this space, we would still be using magnetic stripe cards. And we probably would not be in a digital environment. They continue to push forward and innovate and think about how to improve and adjust and lead. And there's also a competitive scenario here, but much of it is collaborative. And so lots of the innovation requires a security perspective. We really need both. And it is the brands that enable each of the players in the market to adopt new technologies, which will work. And remember what I said earlier, will be interoperable all over the world. So real quick, it won't be that quick because it takes a minute to explain, but there is this thing that Visa and MasterCard talk about called the four-party model. I will tell you that it's not a word that's used quite as often as it used to be used anymore, because all the models are turning upside down and digitization is changing the way we think and the way we operate. But I think it's very important to understand what underlies the entire payment card industry. And it's this concept of a four-party model, which means on one side, we have merchants and consumers, merchant here and the consumer here. Merchants and acquirers. A merchant is any business that accepts payment by cards. It could be accepting payment through a credit card terminal, or through an internet website, or through an app, or through that funky new mechanism that the iPhone will be able to accept payments by tap that we just saw, which isn't ready yet. And it could be any kind of business. It could be a cosmetician. It could be a doctor. It could be a supermarket or an insurance company or a telephone company or a freelancer selling logos and graphic design. Doesn't matter. Any business that accepts a payment by card is a merchant. Now that merchant needs to have a company that connects to its device, whether it's a physical device in the store or a shopping cart on its website, a device, a connection that will allow the payment to be processed. And that entity is called a merchant acquirer or just an acquirer. And the services that the merchant acquirer provides to the merchant are called merchant services. And that's a whole industry. That's actually where I started my career. Merchant services used to be viewed as a commodity. Merchants would bid different acquirers off against each other and just try to get the lowest fees. And it's still that way. However, we will soon see that in recent years, the influx of technology that applies to the way merchants operate has really changed the way we think about merchant services and brought them front and center to innovation. So consumer walks into the merchant, dips or taps or swipes her card, buys whatever, a pair of shoes, and the merchant connects the merchant acquirer and says, should I accept this transaction? The merchant acquirer does not have any direct access to the bank or to the non-bank entity that issued the card to the consumer. Let's call that entity Bank A or Fintech B or Big Tech C. It doesn't matter who issued the card to the consumer. The merchant acquirer needs to connect to that entity and get an approval for the transaction. Is there enough credit on that credit card, or is there enough money in the current account if it's a debit card, or is there enough balance on the prepaid card to approve this transaction? And because the merchant acquirer cannot connect directly and integrate with all of the issuers of cards in the world, and there are many thousands of issuers, what that merchant does is connects to what we call a switch, which is an entity here, stands in the center. By the way, it's funny, we call it a four-party model, but they're actually five parties because we have the switch here in the middle. But we don't count them because that switch is often Visa or MasterCard. So when they talk about a four-party model, they don't count themselves. The merchant sends the transaction message to the switch. The switch, in Israel, that switch is a national domestic switch called Shva. If it's an international transaction, it normally gets routed through Visa or MasterCard. And the switch connects to the issuer, Bank A, Fintech B, Big Tech C, doesn't matter, says, can I approve this transaction? The issuer sends the message back and says, yes, approve it. Switch sends it to the merchant acquirer. Yes, approve it. Merchant acquirer sends it back to the merchant. Yes, approve it. Merchant gets an authorization number, and eventually that merchant will get paid. We'll talk about the process for that in a minute. And on the date that was agreed between the issuer and the consumer, the issuer will charge the merchant. If it's a bank and the consumer manages a bank account there, the issuer might just automatically charge the consumer's bank account, let's say once per month, as happens in most cases in Israel. That is a unique scenario. If it's a debit card, that consumer's bank account will be charged immediately. If it's a prepaid card, then that consumer loaded money onto the prepaid account before the transaction, and that prepaid account gets charged. When you think about the card industry, think about it as two separate industries. Acquiring or merchant acquiring, as you see on the left in pink, and issuing or card issuing, as you see on the right in blue. These two sides of the industry, until recently, really literally thought of themselves as two separate industries. Now, with some of the changes that are happening with digitization, we see more of a confluence of the two, again, as there was in the past. But the rules and the technologies really are quite different for those two sides of the industries. Merchant acquirers work with merchants, with businesses, and issuers work with consumers, with cardholders. Now, I talked about the fact that in some cases, the brands establish the fees or the fee mechanisms. So there is this thing called an interchange fee, which in many markets, Visa and MasterCard establish. In many other markets, such as Israel, it's the regulator which establishes the interchange fee. And it says, how much will the merchant acquirer pay the issuer for the transaction? So let's take a $100 transaction. And let's say the pair of shoes cost $100. And the merchant acquirer, while they paid the $100 to the merchant, they also get a fee for that service. So let's say that fee is 1%. And let's say that the interchange fee in that particular market is 0.6%. So the merchant, out of the $100, ends up paying $1 to their acquirer. The acquirer keeps 40 cents and pays 60 cents to the issuer, that's only if the interchange fee is 0.6%. Hope I said that right. Now let's complicate matters a little more. In the modern world, what we found is that the connection, the technology platform that connects the merchant acquirer and the merchant was not updated for many years, used legacy systems. And new technologies came on site, internet, mobile apps, and transaction messages needed to be adjusted to be able to work with all the new technologies. And so platforms started coming in as a layer between the merchant and the merchant acquirer. We call most of those gateways, but there are other types of platforms. And what happens is that those platforms, gateways, also provide additional services to the merchant. In many cases now, the acquirer provides those types of gateway services or other platform services. And in many cases, there's a cooperation between the two. And there's a question about who owns the customer relationship with the merchant. Is it the platform or the merchant acquirer? And there are many cases where one platform or gateway manages relationship with multiple acquirers. And so when this entity's salesperson goes to the business owner or to the CFO of the retail chain or whatever and tries to negotiate a deal, they also include in the conversation a question about who should be the merchant acquirer that provides this service, or what combination of merchant acquirers do they want working with them. So one of the things that the platforms do is help navigate among the multiple merchant acquirers, and the reverse can be true too. A merchant acquirer can go directly to a merchant and bring in an external platform. And again, as I said many times, the features offered by the platforms and the gateways are also offered directly by the merchant acquirer. Let's look at the issuing side. Platforms came on board there too. I'm using platform very generally. We saw a video about the Google Wallet. Many of us have seen and used Google Pay, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, other wallets. Those are a type of platform. Google, in that case, is not issuing a card to the consumer. It's just kind of providing a container, like a wallet, like a leather wallet, but it's digital for the card. Is that a platform? You know what? Let's not get too caught up with terminology. It is an additional technology layer that provides services and a good user experience to the consumer. And it is not the issuer offering the platform. It's not the bank or whatever company issued the card. It is the technology platform that is engaging the consumer. So broadly and traditionally, the two sub-industries that we talked about are acquiring and issuing, but the lines between them are blurring. In the acquiring space, very interesting to note, the merchant acquirer, the acquirer, is usually not a bank. It enables merchants and businesses to accept payments. It provides an acceptance mechanism either directly or sometimes it's a third party that provides the shopping cart or the gateway or even a call center, by the way. That's another way to accept payments. You can call in, give your credit card number. And even if it doesn't provide the payment acceptance, it lets the merchant connect its payment acceptance mechanism to the acquiring platform. As I said, these services are known as merchant services. We talked about a payment gateway. And very important, the acquirer and often the gateway or the platform will provide lots of services in the area of merchant security and risk management. Without that, we lose the trust and we lose the business model. On the issuing side, we talked about issuers being both banks and non-banks. They issue cards, but they're no longer only plastic cards. Now, most of us, when our issuer issued a card to us, a credit card or debit card or whatever it is, we received a plastic card, but we now have other types of form factors that work as cards. We'll look at those in a minute. And many of them now are completely virtual. Like we saw Google offering a virtual card for transactions to make them safer with e-commerce. The issuer authorizes the individual transactions like we talked about in the flow earlier. If it's a credit card or a deferred debit card, if the transaction amount isn't paid right away, then the issuer provides a credit line. All of us who have credit cards have a credit line that we can use to make purchases throughout the month. And then at the end of the month, we make a payment. If it's a debit card, the issuer usually also manages a current account. There are many markets now where non-banks can manage payment accounts on behalf of their card holders because debit cards need to be able to debit the account immediately. Issuers often offer rewards such as miles programs or discounts at various merchants. And of course, the issuer also collects payment from the customer. And if the issuer has a non-paying customer, then they need to know how to manage that risk and ultimately maybe write off the amount as a non-performing loan. So certainly a financial scenario there. Those were all four-party models. Let me just quickly say there are brands that work as three-party models. You see them listed at the bottom. It's not consistent. It depends on the territory. Sometimes there are three-party models, most times, but many times there are four-party models or there's some kind of combination. But just to make real clear, with these brands, the issuer and the merchant acquirer is the same entity. So American Express is the classic example. They issue American Express cards, but they also provide a merchant acquirer platform. So when the merchant connects, they don't connect to some third party that connects to a switch that connects to the issuer like we saw in the four-party model. The merchant connects to the same company and the routing of the transactions is easier. And therefore, the interchange fee is not relevant. I wanted to say in the four-party model, and I'll say it now, that Visa and MasterCard were among the first to, in practice, implement open source code, because what they did was they went to all the banks and said, whoever wants to use my platform, go ahead. Here's how to access my platform. It's almost like open source, a version of it. And as a result of that, they grew very quickly because they made themselves available to the entire ecosystem. The brands that work as three-party models are different. They don't open themselves up to the entire ecosystem. And as a result of that, they tend to be smaller brands and more unique. They might go after the premium segment. Diners Club, for example, started out by looking for customers that were dedicated high cuisine diners. That's why it's called diners. They went to restaurants and started working with business clientele in New York. And so many of the three-party models are more niche. And you see on the bottom right, I listed transit cards like Ravkav in Israel, gift cards, lunch voucher programs like, for example, Tenbis in Israel or Sibus. These are all three-party model cards that only work in a closed loop environment, and they don't open themselves up to the entire ecosystem, and therefore they really are dedicated to a specific type of payment, whether it's for transit or for employee lunches, etc. So 3 steps to a transaction, what we call the anatomy of a transaction: authorization, clearing, and settlement. I don't know how many of you on the screen are old enough to remember, but I'm old enough to remember when I was a kid, we used to go into the store and there used to be these slips with carbon copies of paper, of vouchers, and they used to have knuckle busters where they would put your card inside a physical device that was very analog. There was nothing digital about it. And they kind of moved a what we call a knuckle buster over the card, took an imprint of the card, and then there were 3 copies. And the customer got a copy, the merchant or the business got a copy, and the 3rd copy went to the bank. But before they let you go, when you made the purchase, I don't know if you remember this. This was definitely true in the United States. They had a book, a pamphlet with it was a blacklist. All of the cards that they should not accept. Don't take a card on this list. If you do, you're not going to get paid. This is what they told the business. So by looking at that blacklist, if the merchant confirmed that the cardholder's number was not on that blacklist, the transaction was authorized. Sometimes, I remember this as a kid, we would sit in the department store, and because the amount was too high or for whatever reason, the cashier called a help desk and they wanted to get a confirmation on the transaction. And we would all be waiting there until they got a confirmation. And then they got a confirmation and they wrote down the authorization number on the slip. I'm explaining this for you to understand conceptually. It's all digital and happens very quickly now. But that's the first step of the transaction. It's an authorization. The issuer, using one mechanism or another, tells the merchant, the business, this transaction is authorized. And here's your authorization number. And with that authorization number, you have a guarantee of payment. And if I am selling shoes to a customer as a shoe store owner, if I have the authorization number, I can give the customer the shoes and they can leave the store because I have a guarantee from my merchant acquirer who got a guarantee from the issuer that the transaction was authorized. That's the first step. The second step, remember we talked about 3 copies, 1 for the merchant, 1 for the customer, and 1 for the bank. All day long, the merchant or the business, the shoe store, kept a copy of every transaction in the pile. At the end of the day, they walked to the bank. Maybe they drove to the bank and gave those slips of paper in a pile to the branch. That's called clearing. It's done in batches. It's done digitally at the end of the day. It could be every 12 hours, maybe less. All day long, the merchant acquires authorizations for transactions. It's like those slips of paper, keeps them, and then at some point sends them in a batch for clearing. It's like going to the branch and saying, here, take all these pieces of paper. These are the confirmations that I'll get paid. The authorization numbers are on there. Now, the next thing you need to do is move the money into my bank account as the merchant and take the money out of the bank account of the cardholder. Moving the money, that's called settlement. And it's all digital now. But if you remember those physical examples, it's easier to understand. So authorization, clearing, and settlement. Every single one of those requires lots of rules and fees. And remember, this is an ecosystem with multiple players. All the merchants, all the cardholders on the end, on the receiving end, or on the initiating end. But in between, you've got all the issuers and all the merchant acquirers. So literally thousands of entities. In every market, it's a smaller number. But even if it's just 10 entities, it's complex. And it all needs to be harmonized. And it all needs to be stable. And it all needs to work. In Israel, we have a population of about 9 million people. We have 1 billion shekels a day, approximately, of card transactions. It's an awful lot of transactions. Okay. That was about global brands and market structure. Let's talk a little bit about merchant acquiring. We already talked about what merchant acquirers do. A bit of a taste from the real world. Merchant acquiring is a scale business. You need lots of volume to be profitable because remember what I said earlier, merchants like to bid acquirers off each other and get the lowest fee. Because if a merchant pays 2% fee, might not sound like a lot because 2% out of a $100 transaction is $2. Still a $100 transaction. It's not that much. Wrong. Why is that wrong? Because if you look at that merchant, if it's a retailer or a restaurant or an insurance company or whatever it is, what is their profit margin? 8%, 10%, 12% profit margin is quite healthy. It's quite difficult to remain profitable above 10% consistently. And if we take 1% out of that 10% or 2% out of that 10%, it's huge. So you think about it, it's like 20% of their profits. And these entities are managing a whole business. Why should they pay a 20% fee out of their profit for card processing? Well, there are lots of good reasons for it and quite justified, honestly, but it creates a scenario that merchants are always shopping and looking for a better deal. And so because it's become highly commoditized, there's quite a bit of competition, including in Israel. And that's why the card acquirers need to grow. And the bigger they are, the better they do for all kinds of reasons, but also because they need it for the margins. So I just put on the screen here some of the better known ones, so you're familiar with some of the names. First Data used to be the biggest, and then it was acquired by Fiserv, which was a huge multi-billion-dollar transaction. Same with WorldPay, which was acquired by FIS. TSYS is huge. Stripe is a fairly young company. It's a fintech that has become quite successful by doing API-enabled merchant acquiring around the world. Nets is based in Denmark. Barclaycard in the UK has been a forerunner in lots of the new technologies for many years, but it's getting harder and harder because there are companies like Stripe and Adyen, which are more and more modern. BC Card, I thought I'd bring an example from the Far East, based in Korea, and Adyen, based in the Netherlands also. Both Stripe and Adyen are considered quite advanced technologically. There are literally hundreds of acquirers, but these are some of the better known ones, just so you have a taste for the names. So a couple things about merchant services. We said the core business was transaction processing for businesses or merchants. We talked about the price being driven down, and as a result, it's become quite commoditized and impacts the profitability of the acquiring. We talked about it being traditionally a scale business, but because commoditization is impacting profitability and pricing so much, all the merchant acquirers around the world, including in the United States, in Europe, in the UK, in Israel, all of them are looking for new sources of revenue. They're saying, okay, we manage these relationships with merchants. What can we do more beyond transaction processing? So things that are payments related are things like gateways or the platforms that I mentioned earlier, fraud management, chargeback mitigation. So if a cardholder disputes a transaction, how do you manage that? How do you prevent it? Analytics, consulting, providing digital ID, risk management. But then they go further. They provide affiliate marketing and they tell the merchant, the business, you know what? Let me help you get customers. Let me market for you in various ways. Let's put together a loyalty scheme where you get, where you give customers discounts, and as an acquirer, I will help you market to customers and bring in more business. Offering subscription platforms. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Invoicing solutions, especially e-invoicing, which tends to be quite complicated. Business-to-business trade directories. They're saying, okay, well, I'm already working with lots of businesses. Why don't I help them buy from each other and grow their business? Expense management solutions. And then in the financing space, we'll talk a little bit more about buy now, pay later, letting a cardholder pay off a transaction in installments, supply chain financing, small business financing. With these other types of services, the acquirers are able to negotiate percentage points rather than basis points. Instead of arguing about, well, am I going to pay, is the merchant going to pay the acquirer 50 basis points, meaning 0.5%, or 55 basis points, 0.55%, and it really becomes quite nitty gritty in the focus on costs. When it comes to these other types of services, especially things that are related to marketing and bringing in new customers, suddenly they're negotiating whole percentage points. You know, should I pay you 5% or 6% for a particular service, a fee on the customers you bring me? Think about, for example, Booking.com or Airbnb. Are they asking for a fee of 0.5% versus 0.55%? When they talk to the owners of the properties, when they bring them customers? No, they're talking about much higher percentages. It could be 10%, it could be 20%. It's nowhere near the types of small volumes that the acquirers talk about when it's pure payment processing. And on the right here, you see from the McKinsey Global Payments Report in 2021 that the growth in revenue for merchant services, merchant acquirers, is mostly coming from non-transaction processing services. And it's not a surprise. And the expected growth for merchant services is mostly going to be in non-transaction processing related categories. And you see here financing, commerce related, payment related, which is not necessarily transaction processing. So another big question that acquirers ask themselves is, how much money is the merchant spending? What's the size of his wallet, of this business's wallet? Let's say that merchant makes, and there is a particular focus lately on small, medium-sized businesses because there is a perception, and it is a founded perception, that most small and medium-sized businesses will pay higher fees than the large ones. So let's look at those that are making about $100,000 in sales. Let's look at what are they spending money on. So they're spending money on all the things that you see here on the screen. And a very small piece of that is payment acceptance. And you can see at the bottom that payments acceptance includes all costs related to payments, including fraud, chargeback, and point-of-sale financing. So that even includes point-of-sale financing. But look at all these other things they're spending money on. Logistics and shipping, insurance, financing, loyalty programs, and advertising and marketing. So the acquirers are asking themselves, since I'm already selling to the merchant, can I leverage that conversation to sell other things that come out of the merchant's budget? And so one of the questions that merchant services providers ask themselves is, who should I be selling to? I'm in a scale business, so the larger the scale, the more likely that I will have the ability to make a significant profit. However, it might not make sense to go so broad. I need to be more focused on a particular vertical. It's a little bit counterintuitive because we're saying scale, so you want to be able to sell to any merchant. But we're finding that with digitization, the merchant's needs become more sophisticated, and certainly if the acquirers want to sell more than just transaction processing. So I skipped the part on sales channels. How do merchant acquirers sell their services? They either have for their proprietary sales force in-house, they do online marketing, they make sales calls. They do it through partnerships, third parties that market their services. They also sell through banks because a store owner might, or a business owner might need a banking relationship, and that bank might say to them, okay, do you also need to accept payment by cards? And then the bank will send a referral to the merchant acquirer, or they might sell through independent sales organizations. That's actually how I started in this business. I started my own independent sales organization. In the United States, there are 4,000, they're called ISOs, that are independently owned and operated entities that sell merchant services on behalf of acquirers. They're almost like brokers. And so, especially to the smaller businesses or to the kind of niche verticals. And so that's another way for them to sell. And yet, as we think about the specific industries, no matter what the channel, the sales channel, if they don't have the product and solutions required for a particular vertical, they're going to have a problem. And here you have a few examples of acquirers focused on health clubs and gyms, an acquirer focused on education. FiniPay is focused on professional services. There are even acquirers focused on charities and religious organizations. This is possible in large markets. In our market in Israel, it's harder because we don't have enough scale in every one of these verticals. And on the right, you can see the size of some of these verticals. And I think what's very interesting is that subscriptions are huge. This surprised me. The extent to which we see huge volumes on subscription services, and you really need a specific type of product offering in order to be able to sell merchant acquiring for subscriptions. I want to say something about timing. It's 20 of 7. So apologies. This is taking me much longer than I expected or rehearsed. And so I will, Ophira and I will discuss what to do about this, because I think there's a lot of really good material here. Maybe we'll need to add a 5th lecture to make sure we finish the payment cards and then cover the rest of the materials. Somebody wrote here that I should keep going. Good, I'm glad you like it. It's very hard on this platform because everybody has their cameras off and I never know, how interesting it is, but I'll keep going.
We can ask to open. It's up to you.
Ophira, I have so much more material that we're going to need to add at least one more lecture.
Yeah.
It's okay. All right. So many of you have heard of Square, now known as Block. They changed their name. They announced that they are going to focus on the restaurant business. Square started by taking a little dongle, which they attached to a mobile phone and convert it into a terminal, which enables you to accept cards. We just saw that Apple's going to enable that with a simple iPhone. But anyway, they've grown like crazy and added all kinds of other services to keep themselves relevant and interesting. And so what they did was, when they went after the restaurant space, they said, we're going to offer integration with delivery. So especially during COVID, right? Everybody started ordering food, ordering takeout or takeaway, as they say it in the UK. And if the restaurants were not integrated with the digital delivery platforms, they had a problem. So Square said, well, I'll do that for you. Or another requirement is order modification. What if you make an order and you place the payment, or you make the payment and then you change your mind and you want to buy more or you want to buy less? How do you deal with that technologically? Another small, little feature, merging bar orders with table orders. What if I move from the bar to the table? How do the restaurants manage that? Or another very interesting one is bill splitting. How do you split a bill amongst various people who came together to eat at the restaurant? All of these little features enable Square to be more relevant and provide value-added services to restaurants, and therefore they are better able to focus on this vertical, as an example. I mentioned before there are many types of ways to accept payments. The one I did not mention is the QR code that you see on the bottom right, especially in the Far East, but we're seeing this more and more all over the world, including in Israel. there are merchants that enable the consumer to scan a QR code. We're seeing that on some of the utility bills in Israel recently and some of the government payments, where you can scan a QR code and it sends you to a payment page where you can enter your payment information. And so it becomes really easy to become a merchant. You don't need to spend money on a card terminal like you see here on the upper right, or even on a phone that becomes a card terminal, or even on a website. All you need is a QR code, and you can scan it and start accepting payments because it sends the card holder to a payment page. So a word about platforms. We talked about how the platforms can come between, they become a layer between the acquirer, the merchant acquirer, and the business. But it's even more complicated than that if we think about marketplaces. So in response to this new phenomenon called marketplace, the global brands came up with a new model called a payment facilitator, or PayFac. You may hear this word if you're in the industry. And it services marketplaces. What does a marketplace do? It matches buyers and sellers. The buyer is the cardholder. The marketplace in between could be, as you see on the bottom right, Amazon, Airbnb, Mercado Libre in South America, which is the Amazon of South America, Booking.com, which matches owners of properties and guests, Fiverr, which is an Israeli company that matches freelancers with buyers of their services. The issue with this type of model is that it's actually another layer in the chain, because who is the merchant? Who's selling the service? So the merchant is the marketplace. Let's call that marketplace Amazon. It's the one we all know best. Well, many of us anyway. But then Amazon has sellers on there. Let's say my daughter decides to sell homemade jewelry on Amazon. So she becomes a seller. So now my daughter's friend goes on Amazon and buys from my daughter, and my daughter's friend is the customer, but she's buying from Amazon. So who's the merchant? Is it my daughter or is it Amazon? So as you see here, that seller becomes what we call a sub-merchant. It's a word that didn't exist a few years ago. Sub-merchant. And so the PayFac model is the acquirer saying to Amazon, you can do this with me. I will give you the payment facilitator model, and you need some capabilities that I, as your acquirer, will provide to you. You need to have a seller onboarding capability. So when Amazon goes to my daughter, let's say her name is Susie. It's not, but I used the name Susie in the example. So let's say her name is Susie. Amazon can't just open an account for her as a seller, because there are anti-money laundering issues, and there are also issues relating to seller fraud and merchant fraud. So they need to do KYB, know your business, know your seller. Just as a merchant acquirer does KYB when it boards a new merchant, if they're boarding the marketplace, they need to require the marketplace to engage in KYB when they board the seller. In addition, the acquirer needs something called a dynamic descriptor. So think about it. When you buy something on Amazon or in any of these places, the statement that you get at the end of the month doesn't just say Amazon. It says Amazon, and then it has an asterisk or a star, and then it has the name of the seller. That's called a dynamic descriptor. Or maybe I should have said earlier, the description of every merchant on the credit card statement that you get or that you see on your mobile app, that descriptor, that description is called a descriptor. And the dynamic descriptor means it can change. And it changes using the PayFac model, okay? And then another thing that marketplaces need, and it's not necessarily going to be provided by the acquirer, but if the acquirer can provide it, they have a better chance of making the sale, of getting the relationship. is they need to enable the marketplace to make payouts to sellers. What do I mean by that? So in the example of Susie's jewelry, Susie's making sales of jewelry on Amazon, and Susie needs and the cardholder is paying Amazon. So Amazon collects money on behalf of Susie, and Amazon needs to pay Susie. So they need to do a payout. And they need to be able to do it worldwide. Because most of these marketplaces are not in one country, are not only in one country, they are all over the world. And so if the example I always like to use is Fiverr, if I go on Fiverr and buy graphic design services from a graphic designer based in Pakistan, there are many of those on Fiverr, and I pay Fiverr, whatever, $100 for the service, how is that graphic designer going to get paid? Fiverr needs a payout service to Pakistan after Fiverr has done KYB on that graphic designer, including anti-money laundering checks. And if you think about it, is the marketplace not acting as a merchant acquirer? They're basically collecting money, sitting on it, and sending it to the business, collecting money from the business's customers. Why is that different from a merchant acquirer? So it's kind of in between. And the industry realized to stay relevant, they need a solution, and came up with this thing called the Paytech model. And some of the value-added services that acquirers offer marketplaces or third parties offer in this space are instant payouts. So in the example of Fiverr, if Fiverr is spending, is collecting, money from this Pakistani graphic designer's customers all month and moves the money to the Pakistani's bank account once a month, would it not be better to enable Fiverr to pay the graphic artist wherever he or she is in the world, to pay her immediately? She needs the money. She gave the service. The customer paid. Why should she have to wait a month to get paid? Well, that's a hard thing to do. So instant payouts are an example of a type of value-added service. There another one is seller financing. So let's say that, eBay sees a seller on its platform selling significant volumes every month and increasing quite nicely. And through its algorithms, eBay recognizes that that seller could grow 3 times as fast if that seller could get a loan. But eBay knows through its algorithms that that seller has only been doing this for 6 months or 12 months. And in most countries, a seller that sells on eBay for 12 months, even if they're selling $100,000 a month and it's increasing by 10 to 20% a month, that seller is not going to be eligible for traditional financing from a bank because they don't have the type of audited statements that bank typically requires. And so why not offer financing to the seller based on these smart algorithms? Just one last thing on the screen here, which I think is just fascinating. And that is a projection by McKinsey, a forecast that by 2025, between 50% and 70% of digital commerce will be on these marketplace platforms. Think how big this is, especially since everything is moving to digital commerce. By the way, I agree. I think this is fascinating. And so when we think about cards, we normally don't think about these other funky things called alternative payment methods or APMs. There are literally dozens of them. I was trying to find a graph where I could show you all of them. Couldn't find one, but you have here a few examples. The one I like best is Boleto in Brazil. Brazil is a cash-rich country, and it is quite difficult to sell and collect payments digitally in a cash-rich country. But if you know Brazil, you realize that they have this thing called boleto, where you can go to a store, make a payment, and then get some kind of barcode, which you can convert into a digital payment. We're short on time, so I won't go into all of these, but there are acquirers who make it their business to enable merchants, sellers, businesses to accept payment not only by traditional payment cards, everything we've been talking about until now, but through all of these alternative payment mechanisms. At the end of the day, there's really three options. It's either traditional payment cards, wire transfers, or account-to-account payments. They could be faster payments, but account-to-account between bank accounts generally. And the third is cash. All of these, one way or another, use cards, accounts, or cash. And yet they each have their own peculiarities, and it is quite difficult to make them available to merchants. So we have a very rich technology and startup ecosystem, both in Israel and around the world when it comes to merchant services. So I'll go quickly through some of the things that people are doing. Many of you will have heard of Forder and Riskified, which started out providing chargeback guarantee. When you buy something with a payment card, you have 4 months to dispute the transaction. What happens when you dispute it? Many times it really is not your transaction, so you shouldn't pay for it. That dispute process is called a chargeback, and it's quite costly both to the issuer and the acquirer. So a chargeback guarantee platform says, route the transaction through my platform, and if I approve it, then you will not be liable for the chargeback. Rather, the company providing the chargeback guarantee will be liable for the chargeback. We've seen unicorns come out of Israel, specifically in this space. Attrition management, when someone comes to make a purchase online and abandons the transaction before they're done, that impacts their conversion. Conversion rate uplift is the same as attrition management. So why is that? Why do they abandon? Well, one reason is not because they want to abandon, but it's because the transaction was declined. It was not authorized. And often it was declined for a wrong reason. It was a false negative. Should not have been declined, but someone thought there was fraud. If the transaction is routed through one of these chargeback guarantee platforms, not only do they guarantee the chargeback, but they're also quite good at managing logarithms and data, which informs their decision-making about specific transactions, as a result of which more transactions get approved. And that is so important to the merchant. It's no longer a conversation about, am I going to pay 0.5% or 0.55%? It's a conversation about, well, out of 100 customers that I was able to attract to my platform and who wanted to make the transaction, instead of 5 being declined, 1 will be declined. And then I gained 4 more customers. And I'm willing to pay for that because that will significantly improve my revenue. Card on file, also known as credentials on file. We've all done it. It's when you save your card number and then it actually gets converted into a token, which is an encrypted format of your card information. 3D secure, strong customer authentication, or multi-factor authentication are these funky new mechanisms that are used to identify and authenticate us when we make a purchase. There are lots of initiatives around identity, digital identity, and identity management to make sure I am who I say I am digitally. And when we get these one-time passwords, OTP through SMS, and we enter the code to confirm that it's us, we're already used to that, but there are a lot more advanced and interesting ways to authenticate customers, including behavioral biometrics. And we have some companies in Israel doing that. IoT payments, where machines pay each other. Perhaps one interesting example of that are the electric vehicle charging stations, but there are many others. Subscription models, you saw on an earlier slide that subscriptions are a huge vertical. So typically, if I want to pay for something, then the acquirer, I see that we're already at 7 o'clock. You guys want to keep going for another 15 or 20 minutes so we can at least finish the merchant acquiring section? Ophira, what do you think?
Well, maybe I think we can close in a few more slides, and then we'll add it. If you thought we're going to have another full lecture, so maybe
we'll do more. This is a really cool space. I hope you guys love it as much as I do.
So I think yes, because I want people to hear the 1.5 hours, and then if it's more, then they might get lost. So
yeah, I see Johnny Paul wrote, it's only 5 p.m. in London. I've got time. I didn't get to drive home. I'm in Jerusalem. I still have a long drive ahead of me. I live near Tel Aviv.
Yeah, so okay, wrap it up with a few words.
I'll try to get through the next few slides quickly. Okay. And so I'll come back to the subscription in a second. As you see on the right side of the screen, travel and entertainment, be it dining or hospitality in a hotel or taxis and mobility. I would just point to that as a space that there are a lot of unique needs, specifically pre-authorization. So when you check into a hotel, they take a certain credit line on your card so that you'll have enough. They're sure that you'll have enough on your card to make payment for the room for 3 nights or whatever. But they also take even more, usually increase it by 20 or 25% so that you can buy things at the bar or at the mini bar. Same with car rentals. When you rent a car, another type of service that is common for acquirers to offer in this space, especially for tourist attractions, is dynamic currency conversion. So rather than the issuer making money on the currency conversion, then the merchant makes money on the currency conversion, and hopefully will give a better conversion rate than the issuer gives the cardholder. Want to go back to the subscription model on the left. So normally when I make a purchase, the full amount of the transaction is reserved on my credit line. But when it's a subscription model, there are all kinds of funny rules. I want the first month free, and then I start getting charged. Or what about happens if I cancel? What does the refund policy say? Maybe I'll start on a freemium model. I'll get it for free, but on the condition that I give you my card, and then later the subscription starts charging me, or I want to upgrade and start paying a different amount. And often the subscription services, such as, for example, Netflix or Spotify, are global, and yet they need to issue invoices. And the invoice sometimes by local law is required to be issued by a local entity, and then the provider of the service does not have a local entity. So how does it offer the invoice? And I just want to kind of give you a quick. Actually, I had my son give me these examples and design this slide. So bear with me for a second because he told me about the second one. But let me take you through them quickly. Look at these businesses doing subscription services. So there's this thing called subscription boxes where you subscribe to clothing. And this is actually a competitive space. You decide you want a particular type of brand of clothing, or you like a particular store. And every month you get a new set of clothes in the mail, new clothes, but based on your size and on your preferences. But what happens is you might not like some of them, or they might not fit you. So you want to return them. Okay, that's a pretty cool model. But how do you deal with fraud? How do you deal with the returns? What do you charge the customer up front? It's a subscription model, which has lots of challenges in terms of payments. Another example is Japanese snacks. Here is a company that offers a subscription to Japanese snacks. Or another one is online gaming, which permits refunds on unused purchases in the game if you don't log in. And Netflix, of course, is another example of a subscription service, and they do not provide any refunds. I think I'm going to stop here because BNPL is another very fascinating space that does require some attention. And that, I think, is the last part of the presentation about merchant services, but there is certainly a lot more that I'd like to share. I don't know if you guys want to ask a couple questions or maybe just call it a day, and we'll agree that the next lecture will be part 2 of payment cards, and hopefully we'll be able to do the A2A piece as well. And then the lecture after that will be digital currencies. And then we'll have one more after that as well.
So I think we'll keep some time for questions for next time also.
Okay.
Right.
Somebody asked about Boleto. Maybe you can write Ophira and she'll forward it to me, and we'll try to get an answer to you, Itamar.
So, yes.
Okay. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
Speak again soon.
Thank you, Oded.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Oded.
Thank you, Oded.
Thanks a lot, Oded.
My pleasure.